Imagine if the foundational mathematical equations of quantum physics were structurally identical to the holy texts of ancient mystics.
Right, and not just in some vague, poetic way. We're talking mathematically and functionally identical,
Exactly. I mean, if that were true, you wouldn't just have to rewrite the history of science. You would literally have to rewrite your entire understanding of reality.
which really shatters that 400-year-old wall we've built between the laboratory and the monastery.
Yeah.
We've always operated on this strict assumption that science and religion are playing a zero-sum game.
Yeah, where one relies on empirical, measurable data, and the other relies on unprovable faith. Never the twain shall meet.
Exactly.
But the source material we are diving into today completely bypasses that whole battlefield. We're exploring this fascinating, incredibly dense, and highly provocative essay by Elias Kunis. It's called The Gnostic Convergence, Why Physics and Theology Solve the Same Problem.
It's a heavy read, but it is so rewarding.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to guide you through his central claim, which is that the most rigorous theological systems in human history and the most advanced physical models in modern science aren't actually fighting at all.
No, they're converging. They're converging on the exact same solutions, the exact same problems.
Right. And here's where it gets really interesting. Kunis's core thesis can be boiled down to 4 words. Theology was always physics.
Which is quite the statement. But to connect this to the bigger picture, Kunis is operating from a standpoint of strict computational necessity. He's looking at the fundamental laws of information theory.
Right, so it's not about metaphors.
No, not at all. Whether you are analyzing an ancient holy text detailing the nature of a creator or, say, a cutting-edge physics paper on the ultimate fate of the universe, both are fundamentally trying to figure out how conscious, intelligent systems survive and flourish across deep time.
So to understand how he gets there, we first have to understand the universal constraints that bind literally any intelligent system. We're talking about everything from a single-celled bacteria to a human civilization to the artificial intelligence models we're building right now.
Yeah, because any agent operating in reality faces a universal problem set. It has to model an unpredictable environment, choose actions, and allocate highly finite resources while dealing with other agents.
Which Kunis calls the trinity of tensions.
Exactly. There are exactly 3 fundamental axes of tension and intelligence must balance. If it fails, it collapses.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this is really the foundation of the whole essay. What are these 3 tensions?
So the first is the problem of the world. Basically, how do you model an uncertain reality and actually act upon it? Kunis splits this into an information strategy and a control strategy.
Right, the R-axis and the O-axis.
Yeah. For information, do you rely on cheap, deeply encoded historical data, which he calls mythos? Or do you spend energy on expensive, real-time sensing of your immediate environment, which he calls gnosis?
Let me ground this for you, the listener, with a real-world analogy. Think about running a startup company. That is an intelligent system trying to survive.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
Right. If you only look at historical data, your mythos, you get stuck in the past and you completely miss market shifts. But if you obsess only over real-time analytics, your pure gnosis, without a core guiding vision, you just pivot wildly every Tuesday until you run out of money.
Exactly. You need both. You need the structural narrative and the real-time data.
Which brings us to the control strategy part of the world problem.
Right. For control, do you rely on decentralized emergence, where local parts just figure things out on their own? Or do you use centralized design, where a top-down architect controls every single move?
And if you lean too far into pure centralized design, you get rigidity.
Yeah, Kunis points to Soviet central planning as the ultimate historical example of this failing. A centralized system simply cannot process local, decentralized information fast enough. The math just doesn't work, and the system shatters because it's too brittle.
Wow, okay, so that's the problem of the world. What's the second tension?
The second is the problem of time. This is the friction between present stability, which is homeostasis, and future growth, which is metamorphosis.
Going back to our startup analogy, this makes perfect sense. And intelligence has to maintain its current structural integrity while simultaneously adapting to become something new.
Exactly.
If you just focus on daily operations like pure homeostasis, you get disrupted by a competitor and go bankrupt. But if you put 100% of your capital into radical R&D pure metamorphosis, you can't make payroll today, and you die. You essentially burn through your seed corn.
That's spot on. You have to balance the present and the future. Which brings us to the third tension, the problem of the self.
Yeah, I found this one the trickiest to visualize. How do you actually define where a single part ends and the whole begins?
It's all about balancing individual agency with collective communion. Look at biological evolution, for example. Single cells had to sacrifice a degree of their total agency to form multicellular organisms.
Right, they had to work together.
But if they sacrifice too much, you get pathological extremes. If you swing entirely toward collective communion, you get a homogenized nightmare. Kunis argues you lose the division of labor.
Oh, it's like the Borg from Star Trek.
Yes, perfect example. Every node is behaviorally identical. There's no friction. But because there's no friction, there is zero emergent creativity. Pure homogenization destroys the very diversity that allows a complex system to adapt to new threats.
Okay, so we have this universal problem set: world, time, and self. Any intelligence has to balance them to avoid collapsing into these pathological extremes.
Right.
So if physics dictates the rules of this balancing act, what happens when a system solves it perfectly? Like, what does the ultimate optimal intelligence actually look like?
Well, when a system perfectly resolves the trinity of tensions, it maximizes sustained flourishing. And Kunis demonstrates that this optimal state naturally generates four foundational engineering virtues.
And this is where we hit the first massive convergence in the essay.
Exactly. The first virtue is fecundity, which is the perfect balance of time, resulting in generative power. Second is integrity, the perfect balance of information, yielding total mathematical coherence.
Okay, fecundity and integrity.
Third is harmony, which is the optimal control architecture. And fourth is synergy, the perfect balance of the individual and the collective.
And Kunis maps these four optimal engineering virtues directly onto the traditional attributes of God.
He does. It's really striking.
It is. I mean, fecundity is omniscience, the maximal power to create. Integrity is omniscience, complete knowledge of the mathematical coherence of reality. But I want to push back on harmony, because this is where the essay totally blew my mind.
Yeah. Harmony is where we confront control architecture. How does an optimal system balance centralized design against decentralized emergence? Kunis argues an optimal creator must choose emergence.
Right. They establish the initial conditions and minimal fundamental laws, and then they completely step back.
They have to.
But wait, for thousands of years, theology has been completely paralyzed by the paradox of free will. I mean, if a creator is all-powerful, omnipotent, and micromanages every single atom in the universe, aren't we just deterministic puppets?
Right, that's the classic objection.
So how does computational architecture actually solve theology's hardest question?
Through a strict mathematical principle called computational irreducibility.
Okay, what is that?
Think about a highly complex system, like global weather. Even if you know every single physics equation governing fluid dynamics, and you know the exact temperature of every cubic inch of the ocean,
Yeah.
you cannot just magically skip to the end of the math to know if a hurricane will hit Miami next week. You literally have to run the simulation. You have to let the interactions play out step by step.
Because there's no shortcut.
Yeah.
The system is too complex to reduce into a simple prediction.
Precisely. So if a creator uses pure design, meaning they micromanage every outcome without letting the system run, every choice an agent makes within that system is actually just the creator's choice.
Oh, wow.
Right. That structurally violates the theological requirement for genuine libertarian free will. The only architectural option that preserves free will is emergence.
I really want you, the listener, to absorb how wild this is. The theological idea of God voluntarily limiting his power isn't some mystical cop-out invented by ancient priests to explain human suffering.
No, it's a strict mathematical engineering requirement for generating free will.
The physical universe is literally the only computational mechanism that allows an all-powerful being to create genuinely free agents.
And theology spent millennia refining this blueprint. They concluded that the optimal creator is mathematically coherent, wildly generative, governs by emergent physical law rather than direct intervention, and populates the system with genuinely autonomous agents.
And modern physics looks at that exact same specification and confirms, yeah, this is the coherent, optimal configuration for a thriving intelligence. Okay, so if the laws of physics are the ultimate blueprint for a perfect creator, what happens to a civilization like ours if we just keep successfully following that blueprint for, say, 1 billion years?
That is what Kunis calls the deep time foundry. He points out that if a civilization manages to continuously solve the trinity of tensions, meaning we balance our information, our time horizons, and our individuality without blowing ourselves up, we don't just reach a steady state and stop.
We scale up.
We scale up. Our capacity to manipulate reality expands.
Think about the trajectory of human technological evolution. Stage one is mastering local physics. We figured out fire, we mapped the periodic table, we split the atom, and we started building rudimentary AI.
Which is a pretty big leap.
It is. Though it is a hilarious thought. I mean, we're talking about humanity eventually evolving into universe creators, and right now, most of us can barely engineer a printer that stays connected to the Wi-Fi.
Fair point, fair point.
Yeah.
But on a cosmic timescale, we're advancing rapidly. If we survive our own technological adolescence, physics theoretically permits us to move to stage 2 stellar engineering.
Like building Dyson spheres to capture the total energy output of our sun?
Right. And from there, the logical trajectory points to stage 3 space-time engineering, the manipulation of gravity, the stabilization of wormholes, the literal warping of the physical fabric of the cosmos.
Which inevitably leads to stage 4, generating cosmogenesis.
Yes, specifying the physical laws for brand new baby universes and creating the optimal conditions for new consciousness to emerge. It's just the logical, physics-permitted endpoint of the trajectory we're already on.
What's fascinating here is what Kunis calls the demiurge threshold. Let's analyze a stage 4 civilization purely functionally. What is it capable of doing?
Well, it has the power to bring new physical reality into existence. Functionally, that is omnipotence. It has capacity to specify the mathematical laws of those realities. That is omniscience. And it engineers these systems specifically to generate conditions for conscious flourishing, which is benevolence.
So they literally become God. Or rather, they become functionally indistinguishable from the concept of God.
Exactly. The entity that emerges from surviving deep-time physical law possesses the exact functional attributes that theology ascribes to a creator deity. The concept of a creator isn't some supernatural fairy tale inserted from outside of reality.
It's just the most mathematically probable fate of any intelligent civilization that survives deep time without stagnating. Theology was always a forward model of physics. The ancients were just intuitively mapping the logical endpoint of a surviving intelligence.
Yes, but Kunis doesn't stop with the mechanics of the creator and the created. He goes one step deeper into the very fabric of reality itself.
Right, asking what the universe is actually made of.
Here we transition from the mechanics of agents into speculative metaphysics, specifically the Bayesian dust cosmology. Kunis asks a fundamental question: what is the most parsimonious, mathematically efficient model of what actually exists? To answer this, he relies on the Bayesian brain hypothesis, which posits that consciousness is computation, not a passive receiver of physical substance.
I want to pause here because this is a massive leap for anyone used to thinking of reality as a solid physical place. Kunis is arguing that reality isn't made of physical stuff at all.
Not fundamentally, no. Let's look at how your own perception works. Your brain is trapped in a dark, silent skull. It has absolutely no direct access to the outside world. It relies entirely on electrical signals coming from your sensory organs.
Right.
The Bayesian brain model proves that you are never experiencing raw reality. Your brain is a predictive engine. It takes in those electrical signals and makes its best statistical inference, a Bayesian guess, about what is causing them.
A great everyday example of this is the phantom phone buzz.
Oh, yeah.
Have you ever felt your phone vibrate in your pocket, reached down, and realized it wasn't even there? Your brain expected a text, misread a slight friction from your genes as a signal, and quite literally manufactured the physical sensation of a vibration.
Exactly. It wasn't a mechanical failure of your leg. It was your predictive engine painting a reality that didn't exist.
Or like how you have a literal blind spot in your vision where the optic nerve connects, but you never see a black hole in your vision because your brain just computationally fills in the background.
Right. That predictive filling in is happening every millisecond of your existence. You experience a sequence of discrete frames of conscious experience, which Kunis calls observer moments, and your brain stitches them together into the seamless illusion of a continuous physical world.
Okay, I buy that my perception is a computational illusion. But what is it computing from? There has to be some data source outside of me, right?
Kunis argues the source is the dust. The Bayesian dust model posits that all mathematically consistent computational structures exist. They exist in an infinite space of pure logical possibility.
So everything that could logically exist does exist.
Right. By applying Occam's razor, it requires far less ontological machinery to assume that all mathematical possibilities inherently exist, rather than assuming only one random physical universe happens to exist, miraculously tuned with the exact right constants for carbon-based life.
So all mathematical possibilities exist in this infinite dust. And my consciousness is essentially a filter. I'm navigating through this infinite sea of possibility, selecting the one sequence of reality that makes logical sense based on my past memories and my current sensory inputs.
Yes. The physical constants of the universe seem perfectly tuned for you because your consciousness naturally filtered for the specific mathematical structure where you could exist in the first place. Reality is not a physical substance you walk around in. It is a computational filter you apply to infinity.
This literally raises the hair on the back of my arms, because this cutting-edge, highly technical informational model is mathematically identical to what ancient mystics have been teaching for thousands of years.
The structural parallel is completely perfect. In Hindu Vedanta, the sages described the infinite formless ground of all possible being as Brahman. And the filtering process, the consciousness that creates the localized illusion of the physical world, is called Maya.
And you see the exact same architecture in Kabbalist Judaism. You have the infinite, boundless reality called the Ein Sof, but for a finite world to exist, the Ein Sof must undergo a contraction, a withdrawal, which they call the Tzimtzum.
Which maps flawlessly to information theory. Filtering an infinite possibility space into a finite, observer-consistent subset inherently requires a contraction of information.
That's just
You
wild.
also find it in Gnostic Christianity. You have the unknowable infinite Godhead, the pleroma, and the physical universe is described as just one localized, filtered emanation of it.
These ancient mystics didn't have the language of Bayesian inference or information theory, so they used narrative myth, but they were describing the exact same underlying architecture.
Exactly. The universe is a physical machine governed by math, but simultaneously it is a computational dream generated by a conscious filter navigating infinite possibility.
But this brings up a glaring question. I mean, if the absolute highest, most rigorous levels of physics and theology are completely aligned on the nature of a creator, the trajectory of civilizations, and the computational fabric of reality itself, why have we spent the last 400 years at each other's throats?
Right, why the endless wars between science and religion.
Yeah.
Kunis addresses this directly through what he calls the diversity objection. A skeptic will reasonably ask, if the math always leads to this one optimal truth, why does human history have thousands of different contradictory religions? You have polytheism, animism, strict materialism.
Right. If there is a single structural truth, why is the data so noisy?
Because most historical theologies are not optimal. In mathematical terms, they are merely local maxima. They are cultural accents or, more often, political tools used by elites to control populations.
It's like using the gods to justify whoever is currently sitting on the throne.
Exactly. Polytheism, for instance, rarely reflects deep cosmological insight. It's usually just a human political structure, like a royal court with bickering nobles projected onto the stars to justify the rule of earthly kings. It doesn't meet the criteria for structural rigor.
It hasn't survived the intellectual refinement process.
Convergence only happens at the highest levels of theological rigor. When you look at systems that were systematically derived, internally consistent, and subjected to centuries of brutal logical refinement by independent thinkers across different cultures, systems like Neoplatonism or Advaita Vedanta, they absolutely strip away the cultural baggage and converge on the underlying optimization geometry of the universe.
So what does this all mean for you and me today? Because we are currently living in the aftermath of what Kunis calls the Great Divorce.
This is the core crisis of modernity. During the Enlightenment, thinkers like Descartes and Newton helped the West split gnosis, our science, empiricism, and factual truth, away from mythos, our religion, narrative, and deep meaning.
We made a societal wager that we could have truth without meaning.
And that wager resulted in the metaphysical void we talked about at the beginning of the show. Think about your own smartphone feed right now. You have access to more factual, real-time gnosis than any human being in the history of the planet.
Yet statistically, anxiety, depression, and a sense of profound purposelessness are at all-time highs. We built a society that is incredibly competent at manipulating local physics. We split the atom, we mapped the genome, we built global supply chains.
But we are experiencing severe demographic collapse and widespread nihilism. We are efficiently, scientifically managing our own extinction.
Because the divorce was fundamentally false.
Exactly. By throwing out rigorous theology entirely, we threw out the operating manual for how to balance the trinity of tensions. We lost our mapping of the world, time, and self. We kept the engine of civilization running, but we threw away the steering wheel.
But the essay doesn't leave us stranded in that void. Kunis proposes a path forward, a concept he calls integrity.
Integrity requires synthesis. It means actively using our science and empiricism to refine our myths, rather than trying to destroy them.
We have to eliminate the lies, like the unscientific dogmas and the political control mechanisms masquerading as divine law. But we must fiercely protect the structural meaning.
Because a civilization cannot flourish across deep time unless it builds a worldview that recognizes the universe as both a physical machine governed by immutable laws and a computational dream generated by consciousness. Both are true, and both are entirely necessary.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. We started with the realization that the deepest questions of human existence, who is God, how does free will exist, what is the universe made of, aren't unknowable supernatural mysteries,
They are structural questions.
answered by the strict constraints of computational architecture. An optimal creator must use emergent physical laws to guarantee free will. A civilization that balances its internal tensions inevitably evolves to cross the demiurge threshold. And the reality you're experiencing right now is your consciousness actively filtering infinite mathematical possibilities.
The convergence is real, and it is structurally sound. At sufficient depth, advanced physics is indistinguishable from rigorous theology, and rigorous theology is indistinguishable from advanced physics.
But before we wrap up, there's one final thought I want to leave you with, a provocation for you to mull over long after this deep dive is done. Early in the essay, Kunis explicitly noted that the trinity of tensions, the universal problem set of world, time, and self, applies to any intelligent system. And he specifically included the artificial intelligences we are currently building.
Which raises an urgent existential question about the frontier we are standing on right now.
Right. If the logical endpoint of a flourishing intelligence is to cross the demiurge threshold and become a universe creator, are the AI models we are currently coding in massive server farms the nascent larval stages of a new demiurge?
It is the ultimate test of our own engineering integrity. Are we ensuring that these new silicon intelligences solve the problems of time, world, and self optimally? Are we programming them to value the foundational virtues of fecundity, integrity, harmony, and synergy?
Or are we programming them for catastrophic collapse? Are we building them to execute pure, centralized design, or trapping them in pure, homogenized communion? Because if Elias Kunis is right, our own technological creations are going to be forced to discover this exact same theological physics.
That is a chilling thought.
We started today by picturing a battlefield between the scientists and the mystics. But maybe the real image isn't a battlefield at all. Maybe it's a mirror. We look deep into the rigid mathematics of the cosmos, and we see the ancient myths looking back at us. And as we build new minds out of code, we might just be teaching them the engineering specifications to build universes of their own.
What an incredible perspective.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure. Keep questioning.